If you've ever wondered what's really going on in a woman's mind, not what she tells you, not what she posts on social media, not the sanitized version she shares at dinner, then you need to stay with me right now because what I'm about to share changes everything about how you connect with the woman in your life. I'm Dr. Lily Harper, and I've spent over 15 years working with couples and men's health, sitting across from real people in real relationships, listening to what they're actually afraid to say out loud. And I can tell you right now, the gap between what women fantasize about and what men think women want is enormous. Most guys are operating on completely wrong information. And that gap, it costs them intimacy, connection, and sometimes the whole relationship. What we're covering today isn't about acting out every single fantasy a woman has. Let me be crystal clear about that up front. This is about understanding the psychology behind those fantasies, the deeper emotional needs they reveal, so you can actually meet her where she is and build something real. There's a difference between knowing what someone craves and knowing why they crave it. The why is where the power is. Here's what we're going through today. First, the single most universal fantasy women have and what it tells you about dominance, trust, and desire. Second, the thrill-seeking fantasies, the ones driven by adrenaline and risk, and what she's actually asking for underneath all that. And third, the curiosity-driven fantasies that are really about feeling desired at a level most men never tap into. Pay close attention to the first section especially, because everything else we talk about builds on that foundation. If you miss that, the rest won't make sense. Hit subscribe right now because everything I share here comes directly from over a decade and a half of clinical work, psychological research, and honest conversations with women who trusted me enough to tell the truth. Now, before we get into it, I want to say something that I think a lot of people need to hear, especially the men watching this. Everyone has fantasies. Every single person. You have them. I have them. The woman you love has them. That is not a problem. That is not a red flag. That is just what it means to have a human brain. Fantasies are your mind's way of exploring possibility, processing desire, and sometimes just blowing off steam. Having them doesn't mean you're broken, doesn't mean your relationship is broken, and it absolutely does not mean you need to act on them. Think about it this way. You've probably fantasized about quitting your job and moving to a cabin in Montana. Doesn't mean you're actually going to do it. You've fantasized about telling off your boss in a blaze of glory. Doesn't mean you should. Sexual fantasies work the same way. They're imagination, not instruction. And for both men and women, they're completely normal, completely healthy, and completely human. The moment you stop judging yourself or her for having them is the moment you can actually start using them to understand each other better. Now here's where it gets important. Should you act on every fantasy either of you has? Absolutely not. Some thoughts are meant to stay exactly where they are, in the privacy of your own mind. And when you're in a committed relationship, there are fantasies that are simply not worth the real-world risk, because once something is done, it cannot be undone. Every action has a reaction. Consequences are real, and I've watched too many good relationships blow up because someone treated a fantasy like a plan. Don't do that. We're smarter than that. All right, let's get into it. The first fantasy, and I want you to really listen here because this one surprises more men than anything else I share, is the fantasy of being dominated, of surrendering control completely to her partner. This is, without question, the most common fantasy I've encountered across 15 years of this work, across thousands of conversations, across all different kinds of women from all different backgrounds. And it shocks men every single time I bring it up. Here's what this fantasy actually looks like in her mind. She imagines her partner taking complete command, not asking, not negotiating, just leading with total confidence and certainty. There's a power dynamic where he is stronger, more decisive, fully in control of every moment. She becomes, in a sense, completely surrendered, not because she's weak, but because she has chosen to trust someone enough to let go. That distinction matters more than anything else I'll say today, so I want you to really sit with it. This is not about disrespect. This is not about aggression. This is not about treating a woman poorly. Men who hear dominance and either get scared off or go too far in the wrong direction are both making the same mistake. They're taking it literally instead of psychologically. What this fantasy is really about is the profound emotional release of giving up control in a completely safe environment with someone she trusts completely. That's it. That's the whole engine. Think about how much pressure women carry every single day in modern life. They're managing careers, families, social dynamics, emotional labor for everyone around them. The fantasy of surrendering that control, of having someone else be decisive and strong and in charge, is a release valve. It's not a political statement, it's not a referendum on who she is as a person. It is simply the deepest form of trust she can offer you. And when you understand it that way, it completely reframes your role. So, what does this actually mean for you? It means she doesn't want you to be passive. She doesn't want you to ask permission for everything or check in nervously at every turn. She wants you to be confident, decisive, present. She wants to feel like you actually want her and you're not afraid to show it. That energy, that grounded, unshakable masculine confidence is what this fantasy is pointing toward. You don't need to be aggressive. You need to be certain. One more thing on this that I consider critically important, and this comes directly from the men I work with who have navigated this well. After moments of real vulnerability and surrender, aftercare matters enormously. If the two of you explore any version of this dynamic, what comes after is just as important as the experience itself. Hold her. Tell her she's safe. Let her know how much she means to you. That emotional landing is what turns a physical experience into a deeply bonding one. Don't skip it. The men who understand aftercare are the ones whose partners come back to them again and again with more trust and more openness than before. Now let's talk about the second fantasy. And this one is extremely common, especially among women who tend to live pretty structured, responsible lives. This is the forbidden location fantasy. The desire for intimacy somewhere it's absolutely not supposed to happen. Maybe a public restroom, an airplane, a car parked somewhere slightly risky, a place where there's a real chance of getting caught. Somewhere the clock is ticking. What's actually driving this has nothing to do with the location itself. I want to be really clear about that. The location is just the trigger. What she's actually craving is adrenaline, that electric, heightened, heart-pounding state where everything feels more alive and more intense. The risk is the point. The urgency is the point. The feeling of doing something slightly reckless with someone she's completely into. That is the actual fantasy. Now I have to be straight with you here because I'm a doctor, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't. Acting on this fantasy in the literal sense carries real risk. Public indecency charges are a thing. Embarrassing situations can happen. Depending on where you are, the consequences can be serious and lasting. So I'm not here to tell you to go do something in an airport bathroom. I'm here to tell you what she actually needs so you can give it to her smarter than that. The underlying need is excitement, urgency, the feeling that you want her so badly you can barely wait. You can create that exact same adrenaline rush in ways that don't put either of you in legal jeopardy. Spontaneity at home. A surprise plan she doesn't know about in advance. A moment of intensity that feels unscripted and raw. When you understand what's really driving the fantasy, you stop being limited by the literal version of it, and you start being creative. That is a much more powerful position to be in. The third fantasy I want to address is one that tends to make men the most uncomfortable, and that discomfort usually comes from misunderstanding it completely. This is the threesome fantasy. The desire to be with her partner and a third person simultaneously. I'm going to be real with you. This one comes up a lot, more than most men would guess. And the knee-jerk reaction from most guys is either excited interest or defensive anxiety, and both of those reactions miss the actual point. Here's what's really going on psychologically. This fantasy is almost never actually about the third person. It's about her. It's about being so desired, so wanted, so completely the center of attention that multiple people are focused entirely on her needs and her pleasure. She is the star of this experience. Everyone in the scenario exists to make her feel irresistible and adored. That is the core emotional need underneath this fantasy. The need to feel overwhelmingly, undeniably desired. And here's where I have to put on my clinical hat for a second, because I've watched this play out in real couples enough times to say this clearly. Acting on this one is genuinely high risk. Not because it's morally wrong, adults can make their own choices, but because the real world outcomes are frequently not what people expect. Emotions get complicated. Jealousy shows up in ways neither person anticipated. Attachment forms where it wasn't supposed to. Relationships that felt solid going in come out fractured. I've sat with too many couples on the other side of this experience to pretend otherwise. But here's the good news, and this is what I want you to really take away. You now know what she actually needs from this fantasy to feel completely, overwhelmingly desired by you. So give her that. Make her feel like she is the most wanted person in any room she walks into. Make it unmistakably clear, through your words and your actions and your presence, that she is everything you want. You can fulfill the emotional core of that fantasy completely within your relationship, just the two of you, with far less risk and far more depth. The fourth fantasy I want to talk about involves intimacy with another woman. This one is more common than most people realize, and it tends to get overcomplicated by people projecting their own interpretations onto it. The reality is, it can come from a number of different psychological places. The softness and emotional attunement women often experience with other women, a sense of freedom and exploration, or simply curiosity about a dynamic that feels different from what she knows. The important thing I want to say here is this. Having this fantasy does not automatically mean she wants to change her orientation, does not mean she's unhappy with you, and does not mean she's about to make a major life decision. Fantasies exist on a spectrum, and many of them are purely imaginative. The mind explores territory that the person has no actual intention of visiting in real life. That said, if this is something she's brought up with you, the right response is curiosity and openness, not panic or jealousy. Ask questions. Listen. Try to understand what specifically appeals to her about it, because that will tell you something real and useful about what she needs that she might not be getting currently. Maybe it's softness. Maybe it's a different quality of attention. Maybe it's emotional intimacy expressed differently. Whatever it is, that information is valuable. And again, I want to be responsible here. Deciding to explore this in the real world, especially within an established relationship, carries significant emotional complexity. Unless both people are completely clear-eyed about what they want and what the potential outcomes are, this is one that is often better explored through honest conversation than through action. Communication is where the real intimacy lives, not just an experience. The fifth and final fantasy I want to cover today is one of the most psychologically interesting ones, the stranger fantasy. The desire for an encounter with someone completely unknown, someone with no history and no future, someone who exists only in that single moment in time. This one comes up consistently, and understanding it properly will actually make you a better partner. What's driving it is a very specific combination of things. First, there's the adrenaline of the unknown, the what if, the complete unpredictability of someone you know nothing about. Second, and this is the part most people miss, it's about total freedom from judgment. With a stranger, there's no history, no expectations, no accumulated image to maintain. She can be completely, uninhibitedly herself, without any fear of how it changes how someone sees her going forward. The moment ends, and there are no consequences, no morning after, no complicated feelings. It's pure present tense experience. Now, here's what that tells you about something she might need in her actual relationship with you. Sometimes people, and this applies to men just as much as women, need to feel like they can let go completely without being judged for it. They need a space where they don't have to manage anyone's feelings or expectations. They just get to exist fully. If you can create that kind of non-judgmental, fully present, completely accepting space with the person you're actually committed to, you've just made yourself more appealing than any stranger could ever be. Because you're offering everything that fantasy promises, plus trust, plus history, plus genuine love. That is a powerful combination that no stranger can compete with. Now, I want to tie all of this together because there's a pattern running through every single fantasy I've described today. And if you see it, this whole conversation will shift from interesting to actually useful. Every one of these fantasies, dominance, forbidden locations, being desired by multiple people, exploration, the stranger, Every single one of them is ultimately about emotional need, about feeling safe enough to be fully vulnerable, about feeling so desired that logic goes out the window, about experiencing a version of herself that daily life doesn't usually make room for. The specific fantasy is almost secondary. The emotional need underneath is primary. Your job, and I say this to every man I work with, is not to become a fantasy. Your job is to understand the need the fantasy is pointing toward and find real, sustainable, relationship-centered ways to meet that need. Sometimes it's being more decisive and confident. Sometimes it's creating more spontaneity. Sometimes it's simply making her feel so wanted and seen that the fantasy has nowhere it needs to take her. And here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the part of this conversation that most people skip over, and it's the most important part. Before you act on any fantasy, yours or hers, ask yourself one question. Not, do I want to? Not, is it technically possible? Ask yourself, what is the realistic best case and worst case outcome of this? And can I genuinely live with both? Because you might be 30 years into a relationship. You might have built something real and lasting together. One decision made in a moment of impulse can unravel decades of trust, and no fantasy is worth that trade. Life is absolutely worth living fully. I believe that completely. I want that for every single one of you. But maturity means playing the long game. It means asking whether a single experience is worth the potential cost to everything you've built. The most fulfilled people I've worked with across 15 years aren't the ones who acted on every impulse. They're the ones who got honest with themselves and their partners about what they actually needed and found ways to meet those needs that made the relationship stronger instead of weaker. That's where the real satisfaction lives. Not in the fantasy itself, in what you do with the understanding it gives you. If this conversation opened something up for you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these surprised you most, or share what this changes about how you think about connecting with your partner. I read every single comment personally. That's not something I say lightly. After 15 years in this field, the conversations in the comments section are often the most honest ones, and I take them seriously. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we go deep on men's health, relationships, and the psychology of connection every single week, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more men understand this, the better things get for everyone. Keep learning, keep growing, and take care of yourself and the people you love. I'll see you in the next one.